Okay, this chapter of Dandadan was pretty freaking bonkers. Not because there was an absolutely bonkers fight, but because there was a surprising amount of stuff to go over here, even though it was just a kind of regular fight chapter. So in this video, we will be going over the lore behind the Cur-Baddie that Dandadan 189 didn't tell you about in this chapter, and on top of that, we will be going over, quite possibly, one of Sakata's funniest moments in recent memory as well. If you're here for weekly Dandadan content, then subscribe. Soon, we are going to start doing shorts for Dandadan, and we are just 34 subs from 5.8k. So subscribe, drop a like on the video, and comment below your theories and thoughts on Dandadan 189. So before we get into the Cur-Baddie stuff, I want to save that for the last thing in the video. We need to talk about this action sequence that is basically 90% of this chapter. This was a whole lot of fun, but pretty much what you'd expect from Dandadan at this point. Essentially what happens is that the Cur-Baddie is just all over Okaroon. But the thing here is that, relatively speaking, Okaroon is able to hold his own without any sort of powers. This isn't too surprising, considering the nanoskin being used here, but it's still impressive because despite the assistance from Sakata in that regard, Okaroon is very impressively able to stand on his own. So much so, the Cur-Baddie ends up having to go as far as to just bite him. In other words, the fight gets nasty, down and dirty. However, whatever advantage Okaroon seemed to have, it really doesn't last that long. Not only does he accidentally touch the nanoskin, but the Cur-Baddie activates some sort of tech within her suit to essentially supercharge her kick attack, sending him skipping across the dirt. But once more, my theory on these two not exactly being allies becomes more and more true. The Cur and Hase immediately get into a fight over who gets to kill Okaroon pretty much, and the Cur is projecting, in my opinion, her trauma onto Okaroon, and Hase feels that Okaroon took his life away from them. Both are effectively having somewhat of a similar dilemma here, and that means Okaroon has the actual advantage of being able to divide them simply by existing in this fight. So it turns out exactly how you'd expect, and how it should. The Cur is swallowed by revenge, Hase is enveloped by rage, and the two start to fight each other. But incredibly, Hase is able to really deal a ton of damage. This surprised me, as I thought for sure Hase would be a bit more unstable due to not only his mental stability keeping him from using his powers at its peak, but instead what we see is Hase pile driving the Cur-Baddie into the earth. And what's really cool is we can see the shockwaves on each level, which probably means that on the way down, Hase incrementally increased his speed more and more. So it is no wonder that for the rest of this chapter, the Cur-Baddie is out of commission. And so this is where things get a little bit off of the rails. In a good way, of course. With Okaroon defeated, Sakata, in his normal Genubio kind of ways, suggests that they should, merge. Now, when I read this, I cannot explain to you properly in words how quickly I facepalmed so hard. I mean, I think I facepalmed so hard I crushed my skull and brain. In a good way, of course. But the reason I facepalmed in a good way is because they freaking merged into what is essentially that Simpsons joke of the two kids in a trench coat. Except the best part of this is that this was the intention all along. Sakata, like always, comes off as dumb, you know, that dumb fat kid trope you usually see from Japan, but Tatsu kind of makes him, like, insanely useful. Keep with me here. Sakata basically wants to combine the mobility of Okaroon with the brains of Sakata. It's a very bold move, and one that seems to be useful initially, especially since Hase is busy fighting with his own partner, until the end of the chapter when it, in reality, he maybe overthought his plan. It made them weaker. Now this sort of reminds me a bit of Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2. You know, the board game one where if you mess up the fusion QTE, you may get some really odd and weird fusion that's funny, but also like really weak. And honestly, what more is there to expect from this? Like, this is the equivalent of Mr. Satan and Boo messing up a fusion pretty much. It's just a total mismatch. However, there is a reality where I think this works and why I give Sakata the credit no matter what. For example, if like Okarun and Momo were to merge, you could have the speed and agility of Okarun, but also have the ability to fight and create a big nuisance with Momo's powers. So this can work, but combined, combining speed with brains or lack thereof, depending if you're less generous than me, it just doesn't really play out that well, at least in this fight. All right, so this is kind of the big thing in this chapter. We should now get into the first page of this chapter, and just because it's the first page doesn't mean it's not the biggest thing that happened here. Because the first page in this chapter has a huge reference in it that, when analyzing it, we can unlock more knowledge and lore behind the Kerr-Baddie. For one, this is clearly a reference to Berserk, which if you haven't seen Berserk 97 or read the complete Golden Age arc, I am going to spoiler warn you now and say that you should go and either watch a YouTube video on it or just read it, because it's Berserk. You gotta read Berserk, y'all. All right, so now that you've successfully clicked off the video, this is a reference to the final moments of Berserk, where Guts is forced to watch the rape of Casca, who is the person Guts is in love with, and vice versa. We won't be doing a super deep dive on this one because we don't know much beyond this just being a reference, but what we can infer through it is so damn valuable. In this scene from Berserk, Guts is basically betrayed by Griffith and is forced to watch his autonomy be taken away with the life he also worked so hard to build together in the Band of the Hawk. To make matters worse, this comes after a brief period of soul-searching from Guts, who left the Hawk while Griffith was tortured, having all of his tendons cut and, well, even worse. So he chooses to sacrifice the Band of the Hawk to essentially get revenge and become powerful. More or less, it's been a minute since I read that arc and the following arcs. I could be misremembering some details. So I think Tatsu was telling us that the Kerr-Baddie went through somewhat of a similar situation. She probably loved another Kerr man and was happy where she was in life, much like Guts was with Casca and in the Band of the Hawk. However, after her husband was killed in front of her eyes, which we do know that is the case, because this piece of art here directly matches the final moments in which we see Guts pierced through the eye and chest, just like the Kerr. This tells us that the Kerr-Baddie is out for vengeance, and she is only held together by the proverbial duct tape that is rage. This explains her hatred for Okarun, because she is only fueled by rage and by the trauma of losing her husband and losing her people. It's a vicious cycle. She can never let go because, well, there is nowhere else to go. The only thing that she has left is literally the rage that she feels as a Kerr who had everything taken away from her. Really, she has ceased to be a person and is more or less a vehicle of despair and turmoil. To simply put, the Kerr-Baddie is Guts in the Black Swordsman arc. She is vengeance. Now, really, honestly, I think there is a big possibility that the Kerr-Baddie may be one of the most characters in the current Dandadan story from a galactic point of view. Not only does she represent another soul manipulated by Count Saint Germain, but like how Vamola is a Sumerian, I just feel as if her character gets back to the growing fear of galactic war that we've not really touched on in a long good while. Could Count Saint Germain be doing this in preparation for a galactic war? Could he be collecting powers in the hopes that he can use them all in unison to act as the lone hero of Earth? Or does Count Saint Germain want to use these stolen yokai abilities to conquer this proposed galactic war and Earth and rule over the galaxy or even perhaps the universe? I don't know. But this chapter was deceptive in how simple it was, but was necessary to lay even more of these seeds that Dandadan, in my opinion, is building up to a gigantic galactic war between, just as an example, Sumerians, the Kerr, what's left of them, the Serpo, and the yokai of Earth, and maybe even other species we've yet to see. If you enjoyed the video, please think about joining our Discord community where we hang out, talking Dandadan, Chainsaw Man seasonal anime, and just a ton of other stuff like gaming and TV/film. Thanks for watching. See y'all next week. Bye-bye.